Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. I'm so sorry that I've been gone for so long. This is what this video is about. I'm here to talk about a little bit of a life update, where I've been, why I disappeared for over 2 months, and also some recent reading because, you know, that's what we're here for, to talk about books. And I miss you all, and I'm so sorry that I disappeared off planet of the Earth. I have a good reason for it though. I found out that I was pregnant at the end of August. Unfortunately, as soon as I found out, kind of a few days later, I started having awful symptoms. I'm on the more intense spectrum of having really bad nausea, all of the things that come with the first trimester. I had it in my first pregnancy, and then with this one, it's like dialed in times 100, and I don't really know why, but it definitely runs in the family. Like my sister had really hard pregnancies, a lot of my aunts did, and I basically became fully bedridden for most of September and October. Out of those entire 2 months, I maybe had 5 days that I was able to get up out of bed because it was that bad. It was like nausea mixed with vertigo and migraines and head pressure. It was this crazy brain fog, and for just those that have never experienced this, they'll just never get it, but for those that have, it's so debilitating. It's insane. I'm currently almost 17 weeks, like 16 and a half weeks pregnant, so into the second trimester. I've had some better days. Some days are still really hard. I'm not quite out of the woodwork yet. So this is, like I said, a harder pregnancy than the first because I think I was already better the first time around, but that's where I've been. I didn't really read much. I mean, I read a ton in August, and then I found out I was pregnant and never did my August wrap up, and just basically barely read in September. Read a little bit more in October when I had some better days, but most of the time with this nausea, head pressure, brain fog, like I could not retain books, stories. I couldn't really read. I couldn't really even talk, and like, I don't know, just ask anyone that interacted with me. I was just so miserable and couldn't really coherently like go through things, even on medication and everything. It's just one of those things. It's just one of those things. So it's been really hard, but I'm feeling better and I'm having better days. Baby's due at the end of April. I'll be a mama too soon. That's that. And again, I'm so sorry. I thought about updating people, but I'm not gonna update anyone why necessarily. And I don't know, again, I was just so miserable. I watched some YouTube stuff and I was listening to some things, but like I said, I just couldn't really retain stuff. So I sort of disappeared off the planet of the Earth. I was in a really dark place physically and mentally. So I kind of just escaped from reality and just tried to cope as best I could to just not really think about how much pain and discomfort and just misery I was in. And so yeah, that's why. So big news. I'm gonna do a 3-month reading update. So what did I read in August, which I was still fine. I read a ton of books in August, but never talked about them. What I read in September, which was not much, and then a couple books that I sprinkled into October. Let's talk about some historical fiction books. The first one is a middle grade that I picked up, A Sky Full of Song. We follow a young girl from Ukraine in the early 1900s. She flees with her family to North Dakota. Her dad and brother are there homesteading and have land, and they're like setting up their farm and home and stuff. And her mom, her and her sisters flee because of the Jewish persecution that's happening in Ukraine, and so they come and basically live in the middle of nowhere. It's that adjustment to a completely different lifestyle and cultural and people and what Americans think of the Jews, which is also not a lot of good stuff. Yeah, it's just this girl story living in North Dakota, and it was good to hear from like the perspective of the homestead living out in the country. I've never read the Little House on the Prairie series or watched it or anything, actually consumed any of that. I have the series and I would like to read those, and I like parts of this book for that. I thought it was solid, but I think I'm reading less middle grade these days for sure, and I'm just less drawn to middle grade stories, but I liked learning a few new things about the Jewish culture and just trying to fit in and all that kind of stuff. There was some sweet messages in here and overall a good story. Ultimately, it's not totally gonna stick with me, and it wasn't like any kind of profound moving thing, but I think for those that read a lot of middle grade, this would probably be really enjoyable for you. Next, I read the final book in the Emmeline Lake Chronicles, Dear Miss Lake by A.J. Pierce. This is a 4-book series starting with Dear Mrs. Bird. I read that I think in like 2021 or 2022, and it was one of my favorites of the year. Since then, so many people have read it and also loved it. It could really be a standalone. Like, it was a wonderfully hard, funny, wholesome, endearing, just like soul-touching World War II novel about the London Blitz, and really fantastic characters. Books 2 and 3 had different little storylines and pivots, followed the same main character, and then this was the conclusion to the whole story, and we follow Emmeline Lake. She works for a women's magazine, and it's her and her team coming together kind of to just finish out the war and get through it amidst all of the heartache. There's some beautiful stuff that happens in the story. The end of the war comes, and so there's like that hope and waiting for it. There's some interesting themes on prisoner of war stuff in this last novel as well. Overall, I thought it was a great conclusion. I think in hindsight, maybe reading them all back to back, like this is why I love to binge series and not really wait till they come out year by year. Like I much prefer to read a finished series, just like I prefer to watch a finished series instead of waiting years for different seasons, because you forget a lot. And yet people are like, well, just like reread. And I'm like, I don't have time for that. I don't want to reread. Again, really great if you are familiar with the series. I think you'd love this last book and the conclusion of it all. I still love the first book, and very rarely do I give any books in following series the same love that I do the first book. I think apart from the Harry Potter series, might be the only one that I've like loved the whole thing through and through. It was fun, it was great. Again, if you haven't read the first book and are looking for a really good historical fiction novel, would highly recommend. Like I always do, I love Dear Mrs. Bird. That's actually one I'd probably reread. I have it here at my shelves in my favorites area. So maybe one of these days, but I'm so not a rereader. But I might be, because I'm just tired of reading mediocre books. I'm like, well, maybe I just need to reread books I've loved before. Anyways, moving on, another really great historical fiction, a new release for 2025. This is on my anticipated reads list, and one that I actually read and one that I actually enjoyed, because there's a lot of historical fiction released this year that I had zero interest in and knew I wasn't gonna read, and a few that I've read I haven't liked, but this one was great. One Good Thing by Georgia Hunter. She wrote We Were the Lucky Ones, which is a very popular, beloved historical fiction. She released that several years ago about a Jewish family during the war. Really interesting kind of storylines and coming together. It was full of hope despite the tragedies of war, and that theme was also very strong in this book. We have a wonderful main character, a very resilient young woman who just learns a lot of lessons, picks herself up, and gets through really tragic and horrendous circumstances. She's a young Jewish girl. There's a beautiful friendship story here. There's a sweet little just wholesome romance without it being overpowering to the main theme of the story. It's mainly set in Italy, which is great. I know a lot of people out there love World War II stories and aren't sick of them, and then I know a lot of people that are super sick of them, but I'm mostly like tired of the maybe UK and particularly France ones. I just like have a very strong aversion to, for some reason, stories set in Paris. I don't know why, that I'm like done with those. But I'm like, Italy I haven't read too much of, and there's not as much, I don't think, because there's less known about what happened in Italy historically, like documented. I think a lot of more stuff was destroyed. This also has themes from people in the Catholic Church that helped, and the resistance underground movement. A lot of traveling, a lot of survival, of like mother-son kind of dynamic here. Just a beautiful story all around. I enjoyed my time thoroughly. If you've read We Were the Lucky Ones and really liked it, I think you would love this one as well. Again, a very solid recommendation and a good story through and through. Was well written, felt well researched, felt well thought out, and kind of all through and through like congruent. Nothing ever felt weird or out of place or out of time, or oh, just added in there because it just felt right, and I really enjoyed the Italian setting. Next, let me talk about some other kind of historical romance that I picked up. So the first one is How to Lose a Lord in 10 Days by Sophie Irwin. I read The Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by her a while back. That was my first historical romance I've ever read, and I really enjoyed it. I don't read the like classic old school historical romances. I find a lot of them not really up my alley, but I liked her writing, and I've now since read all 3 of her books. This one was very silly, and I think at first I was like, I'm not gonna really like this story because it was just really over the top, and a few historical romances that I've read that are kind of just over the top for like the bit of it, just I haven't enjoyed. But this one was fun, and it was fairly clean. Like I don't think there was anything, you know, kind of crude or anything like that in it, but it's a fun story. It's a take on How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, the famous rom-com movie with Matthew McConaughey and Kate, gosh, I forgot her name, but anyways, we basically have a woman who gets a proposal from a man, but then she overhears him talking to his friend about how he like doesn't want to marry anyone, and he's just kind of like doing this, like he says something that totally like turns her off, and she really wants to be with someone for love, not just for the heck of it. So she devises this plan. They're going to his like summer country estate for a big party, and she devises this plan to get rid of him in 10 days because she doesn't want to marry him if he doesn't want to be married to her. And so she just acts ridiculous. It's this whole game and scheme thing. It's a lot of just shenanigans. That was probably my least favorite part, and it wasn't that long before things are revealed, and then more kind of things are happening at play with other dynamics in the story that were interesting and appealing. So overall, I like my time. I think it was like a 3.5. It was enjoyable. It was fun. It's not going to be super memorable. It's not my favorite out of her 3, but it's number 2. Like, I liked Fortune Hunting and then this and then the Scandal one. If you like historical romances that are quite silly and just a good time and nothing kind of, you know, too substantial, you might really enjoy this one. On a similar vein, kind of a fun little twist, I picked up The Austen Affair. This is a new release. I heard about it originally from Krista from Books and Jams because she kind of keeps up with new releases better than I do. And the premise had me intrigued because it was a take on Jane Austen. Basically, we have a couple of actors that are acting in the movie production version of Northanger Abbey, and they absolutely hate each other. They're enemies on set. There's just total animosity between these two actors. Something happens where they get electrocuted on set and they get taken back in time to Jane Austen's time period, which is very silly, but it read like a rom-com. And I forgot to look up if this author is a screenwriter because this book felt like it was written to be a movie, and it was very meta. It was so many like Austen references and a lot of references to Jane Austen adaptations and movies and all of that. So this is for the Austen fans, but big warning and caveat, it is very sexually explicit and it really like goes there over the line for me, and I think over the line for a lot of people, but for some people that can skip over things and aren't super bothered by it, just like a forewarning, it's in a chapter there. These two people that hate each other have to learn to coexist in this historical time period while pretending to be together, and then also trying to figure out how the heck to get back home and back to reality and not just stay in the past forever. And overall, besides the, for me, completely unnecessary, super sexually explicit scene that I don't think was needed or felt in tone with the rest of the book, that I could have done without. And then the rest of the story was just also really fun banter, really interesting kind of relationship dynamics and growth between these two characters to become enemies to lovers. And again, all of the super like meta Jane Austen stuff was really fun. I think this was also like a 3.5. Very good time for Austen fans, but giving that warning, I could have done without it. Speaking of Jane Austen, again, tried to read this for Jane Austen July, read it in August, but I picked up The Clergyman's Wife by Molly Greeley, and this is a story of Charlotte Collins, or Charlotte Lucas, who is a side character in the original Pride and Prejudice. She is the old maid who just needs to get married. I believe she's 27. She ends up marrying Mr. Collins, who is the cousin of Elizabeth Bennet, who proposed to her, and she didn't want anything to do with him, and he's kind of a oddball character. So we follow Charlotte Collins and her longings for love and a different kind of life and the circumstances that she's in. She's a mother. This was one of those books that are the exception to the rule for me. I really avoid books about adultery, even when it doesn't cross the line, but there is definitely emotional adultery in this. There's like an emotional longing and love for someone who's not your husband. It's one of those books that was thoroughly enjoyable. I really like being in her headspace to think about the things that she was thinking about and the circumstances of her life. This felt very much like The Other Bennet Sister by James Hadlow. That was about Mary Bennet, the youngest sister, and her story and her inner thought life. And this was about Charlotte Lucas. So a very solid read for me, thoroughly enjoyable. It felt very in line with Jane Austen. Again, it just kind of teetered on the morally gray line for me, which thinking back this year, there's actually quite a few books that have done that I, you know, have given 4 stars and I enjoyed reading, even though if I take the book away from like my moral views on things, it was still a very interesting read. So I'm kind of learning to maybe separate those things in my mind. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, but I think for Jane Austen fans, for those that especially love The Other Bennet Sister, this would be a good read. Moving on to a contemporary romance that was ultimately quite forgettable, Made for Each Other by Lynn Painter. It's like every other rom-com that I read. It's fine. Not really a standout, not really super memorable. We have a woman who's a maid. She cleans this super billionaire's apartment and she needs a place to stay, or crashes or falls asleep there. And then his parents walk in and they're like, oh, you're his girlfriend that he's been making up because he wants his parents to get off his back. And he kind of hires her to be his girlfriend. And then things turn into more, and then it's very complicated because do they like each other because they were forced in the situation, and she starts having feelings for him, but he's paying her, and that's kind of weird. And he just thinks, well, she's just doing this for the money, but she's acting kind of like she likes me. And so everything's complicated. No one's talking about things. There's dumb miscommunication. There's just over the top stuff. He's really mean to her for no reason, and then but deep down is actually a nice guy. Like, it's just kind of stupid. And as far as contemporary romance goes, I don't think that this is worth your time. Mainly in October, I think. I did read 4 more Draco and Hermione fan fictions, and none of them are particularly worth your time. So I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about them. They're all blending in my mind because they all kind of hit the same beats. Isolation is about Draco and Hermione being stuck together in a room together during the last year of Hogwarts. They hate each other and they end up loving each other, and then it's a very similar ending to the actual story of the books. And it was fine. It was long, and there was a lot of like inner growth for the characters. It was an interesting read, but it wasn't a standout at all, and it's also full of content that I would never recommend people read. Love and Other Historical Accidents was very silly and fun. It was the most like over the top and didn't feel at all in line with the characters in the books or themes of Harry Potter, because it's also about Draco and Hermione working in the Department of Ministries on time turners, and then they go back in time to the Regency time period. Very similar to actually the Austen affair. They have to pretend to like be in that time period, but then trying to figure out ways to go back to their own time. It was just very silly and fun. So this was an enjoyable one, but it didn't feel like Harry Potter at all. It could have been any other story or any other characters. There was a little bit of magic in it and stuff like that, but it was mostly just a historical like Regency romance story with names of people from the Harry Potter series. Meet Your Match. I can't even remember what this one's about, to be honest. Oh yeah, I can. It's like several years after the war, Draco decides to just like escape into a kind of Muggle society in London, and his friends know Hermione really well, so they decide to set them up. It was a lot more like a contemporary romance. I think with a lot of the fan fictions that I read that are more like the characters are older, there's really no magic in it. There's no like Harry Potter-ness. There's no world building. It's just a contemporary romance story. So there's just no excitement in it. It's just kind of a long, usually kind of slog to get through, because you're like, wow, these people really working through some stuff. I mean, I'm still reading them, so there's something about it, but again, that one's very forgettable. Wouldn't recommend it. And then the last one, Measure of a Man, was, oh my gosh, the longest book I think I've ever read. It was so long, and it's such a deep like character work. It's many years later. Draco has a son with his first wife who died. So he's a widower with a 5-year-old boy, and Narcissa's very sick, and Hermione's a healer, so she comes to live there to take care of Narcissa, and they like hate each other at first, obviously, and don't get along, her and Draco. And then Hermione starts like changing things for the family and starts working on their emotional depth. It was incredibly repetitive. It was so unnecessarily long, overly descriptive. There was some interesting themes and stuff that made me continue the story, but I think it was like a 2-star read. Like, I wouldn't recommend it unless you just want to read about like Draco changing his mind for like 2,000 pages. They were just fun escapes. All of these books were just making me not think about my physical discomfort. Speaking of, I guess, fantasy romance, I picked up this guy in August, A Court of Thorns and Roses. It was Garb August. Some booktubers participate in that event, which is reading garbage books. I decided to give this one a go because I wanted to try some more popular fantasy romance, and I tried this one, and it was awful. It wasn't very good at all. It was so cringy to me. I'm trying to remember what my thoughts were in August, but I got through the story, but I was very uncomfortable with so much of it. And I think what the biggest takeaway for me, and the thing that like broke my heart, is that this is considered young adult, and this is marketed towards young adult people, and a unsuspecting teenager would pick this up in the teen section thinking this is a really popular book that people are reading, and then they read this and this is so sexually explicit. This was insanely sexually explicit, and I was so thrown back. I was like, this is an adult novel. I think the later books in the series are in the adult section in the library, but again, working in the library and thinking about, I mean, there's all kinds of books now, but like thinking about someone I don't really even know how to fully explain this, but I was just kind of thrown aback by that. Like, obviously this has an audience, and obviously this has people that love this series and want to read it, but I think knowing what you're getting into and what this is classified as, yeah, it just all felt very like dark and I don't know, uncomfortable and icky. It's this magical fairy land, which I could care less about, and this guy who's a fairy wolf person and a mortal human girl that needs to go live in this fairyland, and they end up falling for each other, and she has to save him because he's taken by some evil witch, and it was all just stupid. I don't fully get the love of this series, why it's like gripped people to their core. I mean, I think I understand it now that I'm reading more fantasy and reading more explicit romance. I understand why people get sucked into this and why they read it, but it hurts my heart of why people get into it. Very similar to why I thought Fourth Wing was garbage too. I would say these books are equally garbage in very similar ways, but that's my opinion, and I'm not afraid to offend anyone, and I know a lot of people that watch my channel would probably think the same, but not for me. A fantasy romance that I read that I actually would recommend for those that do read this genre and prefer something a little bit cleaner. I think it's also a little bit kind of teetering on YA-ish, is The Bird and the Sword by Amy Harmon. I guess technically it's new adult. That one was more enjoyable than A Court of Thorns and Roses, but I don't think I'm a fantasy romance person now that reading quite a bit of it this year, so I think I'm just gonna stay away from the genre. Fantasy in general really is not really my go-to. This one was just had more interesting themes and more interesting world building. The romance was fine, like kind of take it or leave it. Like I didn't even really care about it. The world was kind of interesting, very magical, about a young girl that also kind of gets taken away and uses kind of a hostage in a castle, but she has magical powers that have been suppressed for years, and there's a hierarchy and a class dynamics and war dynamics in this world. Just interesting themes in the fantasy genre space. It's a duology. I read this book. I didn't really have any interest to read the second one, so that tells you where I'm standing. But I think for those that do read fantasy often and read some fantasy romance, I would say this was a solid read in my opinion. I just don't love the genre, so that's why, you know, that's that. I read a couple Rosamunde Pilchers in August. I read The Carousel and The Voices in Summer. I really enjoy some of her writing. I've not liked quite a few of her books that are in the shorter end. The Carousel was very forgettable for me because I read these two so close together, but I really enjoyed Voices in Summer. This was such a solid little read. I think my favorite book of hers is still Winter Solstice, but this was the most enjoyable shorter read, and it's set in Cornwall, and it just had really fun family dynamics and interesting characters and a fun little like kind of mystery that just came out of nowhere. I love that part of it. This was one of my favorite reads by her that I've read. I think it's my second favorite out of, I don't know, the like 8 books of hers that I've read. So totally fun. Would recommend as a shorter read from Pilcher. You know, maybe save this in the summer or anytime you want to read something very summery in Cornwall and England and interesting little family dynamics. So yeah, crossed off 2 more Pilchers off the list. I read a random thriller. This is set in Portland by Dana Haynes. Crashers, had to do with an airplane crash. I really love TJ Newman's books that have to do with airplane crashes and disasters, and I thought, well, this was kind of an interesting one. I found this in a little free library forever ago, and there's not very many books that are set where I live. This was very much like a guy's thriller. This was just pure kind of action-packed. It did have some interesting characters. We have a plane that crashes due to a terrorist attack, but people don't know if it's a terrorist attack, and there's a team of investigators that are all experts in the field of airplane crashes, and they usually come to the plane crash scene and investigate and determine what caused the crash. There's several of these characters, and we're kind of getting to know their backgrounds and their stories and their relationship to each other. And then we have the other side of it where we're getting the point of view from the terrorist and from people undercover, and there's corrupt officials and different things at play. It was enjoyable. It was a good time. This is also a series. I don't plan to continue the series. It was one of those just kind of read it, interesting books, kind of fun to get through, but forgettable at the same time. Not necessarily like a thriller that I would recommend. Finally, really quickly, I'm not gonna spend too long. I read 3 nonfictions, actually all in August. Starry Night, Blurry Dreams is one I found in a little free library from my most recent little free library video. It's kind of like a random poetry artistic collection. This was absolutely nothing special. It's just kind of garbage. I don't know how someone would pay $19 for this random book. For some, this is like a piece of art, and it felt like, you know, old school like Instagram, Tumblr tweets where it's just some random thought that someone has along with a picture. It was really random. Maybe for those that like Rupi Kaur or whatever, that poet, I didn't really get along with her poetry. This kind of felt similar. I read The Montessori Toddler by Simone Davies. I have a toddler. I like some things about Montessori, not all of it, but they have some really interesting takeaways from this. So this was a fun little read to get ideas for how to set up our home and just make it more toddler friendly. And then I read The Library Book by Susan Orlean. This one is a nonfiction that's been on my shelf and TBR for years. I read it this summer. It's about the big 1986 Los Angeles Public Library fire that destroyed so much of the library, and this follows the investigation of what happened, what set the fire, who was the culprit potentially, and it was never really solved or uncovered, but there's theories of what happened. And so this author goes into those theories and the different people involved, and in general kind of the world of public libraries and the history of them and how things progress, the architecture of the library and different buildings in LA and that kind of stuff. It was interesting but forgettable. It wasn't a standout nonfiction read that like gripped me. I learned some new things, especially working at the library. It just wasn't as impactful as I expected when I've heard people talk about this book. That's me. That's my reading update for 3 months. Way too many books. That's my life update. Thank you so much for watching. For those that are still here and want to say hi, if you have any questions or just anything, feel free to ask. I'm again sorry I disappeared, but I had a good reason and I was really just in survival mode. But I hope to be back. I have so many video ideas. I am like dying to create content. I'm really inspired to do so. I've been watching still so many people that I love. I just haven't really responded or, you know, participated with the community, but I miss you all. So let me know if there's anything you want from me, anything you'd love me to comment on or see from me. But I do have ideas, and I'm just praying for the health and the energy to be able to, well, just do life in general, but also create content. I mean, everything fell to the wayside, but I'm hoping to get back to things in my day-to-day life. And this is a very important hobby of mine that I've loved for years. In this month in November, I've been on BookTube for 5 years. Yeah, if there's any content you want to see around that too, I haven't really thought about it, but I'd love to create something. Again, thank you all for being here. Let me know what you think of my thoughts, or if any of these books sound interesting to you. If you have any other comments or questions, I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye.